The earliest video game tie-in with a piece of media that I could find is Atari's 1975 arcade game Shark Jaws, adapted from the film Jaws, Steven Spielberg's breakout blockbuster. While the tie-in is unofficial as Atari couldn't get the actual license, it's commonly recognized today from the cabinet trying to hide the shark part of Jaws, loudly proclaiming Jaws with shark being in small text. The game itself wasn't released under the Atari name, but under a pseudonym of Atari simply titled Horror Games. While the branding was focused on dodging IP infringement, the title still attempted to adapt the horror of violent shark attacks depicted by Jaws to a user-controlled format. In the game, you are a scuba diver hunting small fish while a large shark tries to kill you. It's probably the bluntest aspect of Jaws to adapt, big shark eat human, but in 1975, only 3 years after Pong's revolution, Shark Jaws is pretty decent for the technology of the time. It became relatively successful until pressure from lawyers in 1982 forced the name to change to Shark Attack for all future versions. Its impact showed that adapting the experiences of other media can work well for video games, and thus sparked a massive interest from IP holders in video games. Cheap video game titles and shovelware media tie-ins became relatively popular, so much so that Atari bet the video game industry's sustainability on one, Atari's E.T., which was so good and definitely not rushed to meet holiday deadlines that Atari decided to dump several unsold cartridges of the game and other failed Atari titles in a New Mexico landfill in 1983. Decades later, with many lessons learned, two forms of media tie-in video games exist today. One is these before-mentioned shovelware games, made only to promote a franchise and are typically very, very poor in quality. The other is more artistically interesting, a tie-in with a dedicated developer and publisher working to emulate the experience of an original piece of work in a media format that prioritizes an individual pushing buttons to make the hero go bam bam. In the last console generations, games like the Batman Arkham series, Alien Isolation, and the Shadow of Mordor series represent these IPs adapting their original franchise's main features and appeals to video games. Batman's use of gadgets and hand-to-hand combat intertwine with detective mystery and silent assassination. The Lord of the Rings magic, lore, and sword combat combine along with the Nemesis system to carve out a story with some player-unique moments within Middle-earth's most dangerous location. Alien Isolation deserves phenomenal praise for creating a horror experience out of the stalking of an unkillable alien that uses the aesthetics of a film released decades earlier. These games succeeded by adapting the source material in a way that created unique mechanics and experiences that aligned with the original feelings of the source material itself. They are amazing adaptations. So, let's talk about Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan is easily the most popular anime of today's modern age, with the first season topping the most popular shows list of anime on aggregate sites like AniList and MyAnimeList. Its legacy is attached to an explosion of interest in anime from Western audiences due to its quality animation being attached to a mature, gory story, something that was rarely done in Western animation at the time. In the same way that Shonen Jump shows in the 90s and 2000s brought international attention to the anime industry, so did Attack on Titan in the early 10s. The first season's story of children having their childhoods and families destroyed in front of them by an impossibly monstrous, unexplainable force, and then growing up to spend their adolescence in fear of their own demise at the hands of this same force, struck a chord with young Western audiences. Conspiracy, mystery, horror, and the fast-paced action of the series made it a modern classic. The break between the first season's conclusion in 2014 and the second season's premiere in 2017 left a 3-year gap, which was used to let the story of the manga build. In the meantime, Attack on Titan in the modern pop culture space exploded as one of the prime representations of anime. Spin-offs and merchandise were created to capitalize on its newfound audience. One such piece of franchise expanding was Attack on Titan's foray into video games with Koei Tecmo's Attack on Titan game, released in 2015 in Japan and 2016 everywhere else. In Europe, this game is called Attack on Titan Wings of Freedom, which is what I will refer to it as when I mention the game to avoid confusion. It's a game that not a lot of people have played or know about, as physical copies of the game are hard to find and price drops for digital versions are rare and small. with most Steam reviews of the game lamenting the high price tag. To be honest, the game itself isn't all that impressive. It's not graphically amazing or mechanically unique enough to really break ice in a massive way, but its existence represents a question about adapting franchises to video games that I find really interesting. Let's talk about it. Also, full disclosure, I'm going to only be talking about Season 1 of the anime when talking about examples from the anime or manga about this Wings of Freedom game, as Wings of Freedom released when the later seasons were still in production, and the themes, equipment, and characters of the latter half of the series also radically changed Attack on Titan's themes. It's a very, very different show by that point. It would be unfair for me to bring up examples from what is basically the future. Okay, back to it. Wings of Freedom was published by Koei Tecmo and developed by Omega Force, notable for creating the Dynasty Warriors franchises and incorporating the gameplay loop from Dynasty Warriors into other notable franchises, such as for Hyrule Warriors and for the One Piece Pirate Warriors spin-offs. These types of games are called Musou games, and Koei Tecmo and Omega Force are experts. If you have never seen a Musou game, they're recognizable by hack-and-slash gameplay, where you as a military leader have overwhelming power as you mow through hundreds and sometimes thousands of enemies to conquer the battlefield levels that make up the story of each game. Special abilities and spectacle make these games like eating pure sugar to play, with the moment-to-moment gameplay of massive genocide through Big Stick complemented by the conquering of the battlefield stronghold by stronghold. The player has so much power that button mashing is a genuine strategy and sometimes encouraged. It's a style of game that some people like myself really love and some people really hate, mostly coming down to how much fun you think doing the same few simple combos over and over again is. The average gameplay loop starts with the player and their army being relatively small, but over the course of a level, as they get more soldiers and conquer more territory, their army grows more powerful. It simulates the swaying of fantastical battle due to the actions of a single commander, who also happens to be fighting in the battle itself and represents the player's actions and efforts. Victory is decided by the player's actions and how they surf the tide of the battle. The player has relatively simple movement with massive combo attacks, and basic enemies are weak and plentiful. It's not surprising to rack up thousands of enemy KOs by the end of any one level. Koei Tecmo and Omega Force decide to use this style of game for their adaptation of Attack on Titan, which sounds like a good choice on paper. One of Attack on Titan's major components revolves around battlefields and military action, with the Wings of Freedom, the game's title pulls from, representing the Survey Corps' iconography. Adapting this sounds like a good idea, but there's a small conflict, and actually it's a pretty big conflict. Attack on Titan isn't really a franchise about having a fighting chance. In fact, one of Attack on Titan's most important rhetoric is that humanity is demonstrably puny in the face of the Titans, the terrifying, mysterious, and destructive antagonists.
彼らと人類の間には圧倒的な力の差が存在したちまち人類は絶滅の危機を迎えた。
今回の調査で我々はいや今回も何の成果も得られませんでした。
Soldiers undertake years of training and experience with the omnidirectional mobility gear that is required to even stand a chance against them, and still experience immense loss and grief. An average human has no chance against the Titans. Does the style of a Musou game, which prioritizes overwhelming power, make sense in this world? First, it's important to note that there are several modifications to the Musou style within Wings of Freedom's mechanics. The most major modification is dedicated to the player's movement. One of the signature features of Attack on Titan as a franchise that relates to the action of the series is the omnidirectional mobility gear, which is the equipment that soldiers use in order to fight Titans. The blend of hooks and the use of gas allow for aerial combat. These weapons allow humans to fight at incredible speeds and vertical positioning in order to fight against Titans. It's one of the strongest definitions of human ingenuity, where our feeble human bodies would be unable to fight monstrous creatures by ourselves, so we create equipment to enhance ourselves unlike any other species of animal on this planet. Of course, this equipment probably would never be physically or scientifically possible in the real world, but it doesn't matter because of how phenomenally cool it is. Humans were not meant to fly at incredibly high speeds to precisely slice the neck of a giant titan. but the feat is full of speed and precision to make the action of the series incredibly dazzling. The interpretation of this incredibly complex physical ability in Wings of Freedom is simple. Press a button to send your anchors out and you move forward in the air. You can also dash in the air with a different button that launches you with a boost. Besides the standard adjustments you make with standard thumbstick movement, that's all it takes to use the gear to move. There's no complex targeting system to properly swing around, it's fluid to use, and the dash of the gas makes moving fast feel fun and precise. To be a little crude, it's similar to games like Spider-Man, where the purpose of movement is to feel as fluid as possible, rather than to make complex movement inputs potentially frustrating for players. Accessible movement allows for players to find ways to exploit the mechanics to maximize speed and technique to move as quickly as possible. For a Musou-style game, it works brilliantly. Massive battlefields that make up the levels of the game are hard to navigate through on foot, but the speed of using the mobility gear allows for the levels to open up to the player. It's a decision that aligns itself with the original combat system from standard Musou games, preferring simple inputs that result in massive spectacle. Musou games are designed to also prioritize speed in navigation and large kill count, something encouraged by most games' ranking systems awarding higher ranks with faster clear times and higher enemies slain. A better player of these games kills fast and moves faster, prioritizing the best engagements efficiently while maximizing the game's mechanics to destroy anything that stands in their path. Musou games when it comes to movement have never been too complicated, focusing more on the spectacle of combo attacks, but Attack on Titan shows a strong case for how movement can make the style of game better, while still keeping the spectacle. Arguably the biggest change to the main structure of the Musou genre that Wings of Freedom changes are the basic enemies. No longer do several thousand pitiful grunts roam the battlefield only to be slaughtered by the player. Now, around 20 to 60 titans roam the battlefield. It's a purposeful downscale, as it allows for the enemies to be more dangerous and killing titans a harder task. Titans are such a central part of Attack on Titan, the beasts that have diminished the human race close to extinction. Making them as frightening and as monstrous as they are in the anime and manga is a tall task, but if done well, the helplessness of the original source material can reach new heights in a player-focused medium. The Titans themselves are designed pretty accurately to their source material. Their movements are gaunt and inflated, with fast movements being threatening. Navigating the strategy to beat them has a solid core to it, with aiming at either the forelimbs of 2 arms and 2 legs, or going straight for the nape, done intuitively based on the positioning of the player and the targeting system. This system is another step in making the decision to move more important. As soon as you decide to strike, letting go of the thumbstick starts the process of the player moving forward, and a final well-timed strike kills or severs the Titan's nape or limbs. It's a little awkward at first, but after a while, this repetition makes annihilating Titans easy and rewarding for quickly severing limbs and killing Titans fast. There's a slight problem though. Titans are really easy to kill, which has numerous consequences of how Musou games have these mini-boss enemies typically scattered throughout that serve as the main enemies that can actually hurt the player. While the standard enemies are mopped up as if you're cleaning the battlefield, these stronger enemies can strike, block, and damage the player. Defeating these enemies require a bit more skill other than simple wailing. It provides unique challenge and important generals to defeat in the context of a mighty battle. Attack on Titan Wings of Freedom doesn't really have this. Titans, much like their source material, can only hurt the player in 2 ways: lunges to bite or simple grabs. Damage isn't a factor due to grabs being easy to break out of, along with an extremely generous focus time ability and the ability to heal out of any damage with the use of a restorative item. Forming a strategy in the moment to kill Titans is satisfying, not because you're taking down a powerful creature, but there's a precision inherent to the design of the Titans. Unlike the source material, Titans in Wings of Freedom are extremely predictable 100% of the time. There is almost no danger to fighting a Titan, which allows for the game to feature the player killing several Titans in a single level in an incredibly quick pace. This isn't a fundamental problem with the game. In fact, this benefits the game in a massive way, something that is important to recognize within the Musou genre. This benefits the spectacle. Musou isn't a genre that's focused on tactical battlefields in large armies, despite them being core features of the genre. It's the spectacle and overwhelming power of the player that fuels the entire genre. Large combos, large kill count, bigger, better. Attack on Titan allowing for Titans to not be dangerous goes against everything that the series is about. It is fundamental in order to capitalize on the Musou genre. The levels are designed for speed and precision with the use of the omnidirectional mobility gear, and fighting Titans with it makes levels races to see how fast you can take down these creatures. It's not simply go to point A to point B, it's finding out how fast you can kill point A, and then how fast you can kill point B. It's incredibly satisfying, at least to me. Like I said, Musou games largely depend on how you as a player enjoy the spectacle, and while I understand that repetitive mechanics bother some, I absolutely adore them. But there's still the question, is Wings of Freedom still a good adaptation? It's a very semantics and opinion-filled question, but it's important to recognize. Attack on Titan as a manga or anime has distinctive characteristics that fundamentally make up the core of their presentation. When adapting from this original source material, how important is it to fit every component and cog to your adaptation? Let's go over a few pieces of Attack on Titan's components and see how they are adapted to Wings of Freedom. A pivotal component of Attack on Titan's mobility gear is that the gas and blades required to fight deplete extremely fast, so it's important to be efficient or find yourself underpowered against the Titans. Wings of Freedom does have limited resources in the forms of blades and gas meters, but to be honest, they're negligible at best. Early runs through the levels might have a few pit stops to replenish the gas and blades, but they're so unimportant in the long run that they don't come as a conscious thought. Additionally, there is the focus gauge, which allows for a special buff where the player does more damage for a limited period of time. Also, during this period of time, resources aren't diminished. It feels like an afterthought, an acknowledgement of the importance of these resources from the original source, but they aren't given the same weight in actual gameplay. There's one character whose focus gauge does something different. Eren Yeager, with his focus gauge, turns into a Titan. This mode is incredibly fun. It provides the same level of brutal dichotomy for the new purposeful punches and swings of a human form Titan compared to the original Titans. The sounds are especially meaty. As a mechanic, Titan Eren is fun. From an adaptation standpoint, it still doesn't fit with the overall original story. I hate to be a purist when it comes to the source material, but Eren's Titan form is seen by the military as a massive secret and should only be used in emergency situations. Also, it notably leaves Eren extremely tired and unable to move effectively for several hours. This doesn't happen in Wings of Freedom and is mostly encouraged to use the Titan form as much as possible to make use of its strength. Finally, just to keep this short and not to be too annoying, let's talk about horses. One of the major problems with the mobility gear in Attack on Titan is the inability to use it in wide open spaces. Horses are the biggest way the Survey Corps is able to avoid combat in these spaces and are also used to outrun Titans. In Wings of Freedom, you are given horses and you are unable to use the hooks of the mobility gear in wide open spaces, but the dash that comes with the standard movement still functions and is way faster and more fun to use than the horses. It does use a lot of gas and might require more pit stops, but the horses once again represent a nod to the original source material that still doesn't result in more nuanced gameplay. The player seems to always have overwhelming power. Wait, isn't overwhelming power the way I described Musou games? So wouldn't this be a good thing for the game itself? Oh god damn it, we're in a loop! Wings of Freedom is a Musou game, which prioritizes giving the player overwhelming power to make the spectacle of the game that much more rewarding and satisfying to play. However, this fundamentally goes against what Attack on Titan represents in its themes and components. The presence of dread is non-existent in a game where you can kill the most dangerous creatures as if you were a fork stabbing meat on a plate. There's a mission in Wings of Freedom where both resources of gas and blades are removed from the player as you wander around a Titan-infested town. This would be an interesting situation if the level didn't also have an AI-controlled Titan Eren defending you. No danger is ever felt by the player. Danger is only implied through the player's previous knowledge of the original source material or the game's cutscenes, which don't have the same level of depth or emotion that the original source material has, which is a common problem when it comes to adapting storylines from visual media to video games. Attack on Titan's characters and military action move with the knowledge and visible teamwork of the others around them. They move in squads, formulate plans, create situations that could lead to their inevitable success. Commander Erwin as a character represents a fascinating ideology of gambling the entire human race on devious coin flips, which represents the knowledge that those around him will ultimately perish. He understands the cost of his actions but continues living knowing that his actions have caused the death of others. In Wings of Freedom, you can see on a minimap every time an AI soldier dies to a Titan, but there is no consequence for this happening. Your goal still remains the same. Even in standard Musou games, seeing your other commanders in trouble signals a need for intervention. But the deaths in Wings of Freedom have no haste. They are annoying pop-ups that mean nothing for the player's actions, and that's kinda sad. When the player has overwhelming power, it doesn't matter as long as the player maximizes their own ability. There's a scene in the manga when introducing Squad Levi, described as the best soldiers in the Survey Corps, with numbers of their kill counts and assists. In a retrospective after playing the game, these numbers seem incredibly low compared to how some single levels in the game require you to kill more than an individual member of Squad Levi has in their entire military careers. One of the game's achievements even requires you to kill 1,000 Titans overall. Yet, this disconnect from the original source material is what allows for Wings of Freedom to mechanically succeed. How fun would moving straight through a forest and avoiding conflict be? Would being so incredibly underpowered actually be fun? The team at Omega Force clearly thought about these components, which is why the resource management and horses exist in the game, but the changes they do make is to make sure the Musou genre works for the game. This still makes Wings of Freedom only a surface level representation of the original source material, a game made to emulate the look of the action in Attack on Titan but lacking the emotional core. The game is incredibly, beautifully fun in a way that no other game is currently like. It's a standout for the Musou genre. But as an adaptation, it misses too many vital aspects about Attack on Titan to ignore. In an adaptation, what is more important? Is it emulating the style and themes of the original source material, or is it making a mechanically fun game based on the most marketable parts of the source material? This question doesn't actually have a right answer. It will always depend on the medium, the original source material, and most importantly, the people who make or receive a piece of media. Shark Jaws as an adaptation utterly fails, mostly due to the technology of the time. It's unable to evoke the same sense of dread from the original source material, even if the same general idea is there. But it still was a quarter muncher, because in the end, someone wanted to play the game because it was fun. In the same way we go to movies to see special experiences, we play games to play something special. Wings of Freedom does not evoke the dread or deeper themes of its original source material, but it's an absolutely unique experience. The components cut only works to make the mechanics of the game better, and it still comes out the other side being extremely fun. Looking at the series I mentioned earlier, they all clearly sacrificed aspects of the original work to be able to make their adaptations succeed in the input-driven format of video games, but they are able to do that in a way that doesn't remove the most vital parts of their source material. Wings of Freedom's combat emulates the action of Attack on Titan extremely well, but it ultimately misses out on why Attack on Titan is still special. But the game's still fun. Look at me go. Hell yeah! Hi, thank you for making it to the end of this video. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this. Since you made it to the end, you probably liked the video, so I would really appreciate if you could like the video and subscribe to my channel for more stuff like this. I'm hoping to make a lot more videos this year. You can get some updates on when or what videos are coming if you follow me on Twitter at Pergzzz and on Twitch at twitch.tv/Pergzzz. Thank you. Have a good day.